This is a 19th century variation on the whole idea of the dinner gong. Swans in the Bishop's Moat at Wells in Somerset ring the gatehouse bell when they want to be fed, a trick originally taught them by a bishop's daughter who grew up here in the late 1800s. The water in the moat tells you the whole story of Wells itself. Without the water, there would have been no great cathedral, no magnificent gardens, no bishop's palace, no community here at all. The natural springs in the garden of what is now the palace are really the foundation of everything. One of the great writers on church architecture described all this as the most memorable of all bishops' palaces in England, largely thanks to the 15th century Bishop Beckington, who developed not only the palace itself, but also the complex system of civil engineering by which water from the springs here supplied the needs of the city. But Bishop Beckington was only one of several notable clerics who've led this diocese. Bishop Peter Muse was known as the Bombardier Bishop because he fought for King Charles during the Civil War. His successor, Bishop Thomas Ken, was a principled and saintly man who is said to have sung the same famous hymn he composed every morning before breakfast. Among other bishops of Bath and Wells was Cardinal Wolsey, and more recent incumbents have included the present Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey. Edward Wills, who was bishop here in the 18th century, is of more than passing interest to us on the Antiques Roadshow. He was a cryptanalyst, an expert in secret codes, and his evidence was crucial in the conviction of Francis Atterbury, Bishop of Rochester, who'd been accused of plotting to overthrow King George I. As a result of Bishop Wills's evidence, Atterbury was convicted of treason and banished from England for life. Well, Bishop Atterbury is directly related to our own Paul Atterbury, an expert in deciphering several mysteries on the Antiques Roadshow. So, let's now join Paul with our other experts here in the grounds of the Bishop's Palace.
So I can see that you're a cider drinker, am I right? With all these cider mugs?
As well as a cider maker.
You actually make cider?
Yes.
And you provide what? Cider for the local
for local drinking, yes.
What a fascinating thing to do. Is this an old family business?
Yes, we've been in street nearly 100 years next year.
Making cider all that time. In Worcestershire, where I come from, in Herefordshire, they say that cider is always best out of a pottery mug. I don't know whether that's right. They say you shouldn't drink it out of glass or china, but out of crude pottery, like this sort of mug, which is great fun, isn't it? This is probably, is this your oldest?
Yeah, I think it was probably.
You've got a large collection of them, haven't you? But this goes back, of course, to about the 1820s, 30s, and it's got the wonderful poems about Godspeed the Plough, about the farmers. And I suppose each person would have his own individual cider mug at that time.
Yes. They would hang them up in the bar.
Hang up, and then you go into the pub and you have a pint out of your own cider. And some of them are larger than a pint. This one's a quart.
Yes.
It's great fun, that one. I think it's enormous fun, that. And this one, much larger than a quart. What's the history of this?
My grandfather obviously bought it in the late 1800s. And the end of the Boer War, my father said he filled it up with whiskey and passed it around the bar.
Like as a toasting?
As a toasting,
piece,
yes.
Yeah. So not just cider in it, but something much stronger. Although cider can be really well strong, can't it?
Quite strong,
How strong is your cider?
Around about 6%.
Yeah, so it can, a few pints of that,
Yeah.
and the jolly boys are wandering around the lane, aren't they? And of course, so marvellous about these mugs is often they have naughty things inside them, like this one's got a frog. And what's it, a lizard? Or
a lizard, or some way we call it a newt.
A newt in the bottom there. I suppose the idea really, when someone's drunk, they're drinking out of this, and the frog's about to go down your throat. And this one, of course, made to commemorate the South African War, is perhaps the most valuable one, and dated 1900, and made by William Lowe of Longton in Stoke-on-Trent. So perhaps we're looking at, well, I suppose ranging from the cheapest ones, 30, 40 pounds, right up to the most expensive one, perhaps this at several £100.
Yeah.
So the collection is rather nice. So carry on drinking your cider out of them. But which one do you drink from when you have the choice?
I would think this one.
Yes.
Because it's nice.
I think that's the most perfect cider mug of the lot.
Yeah.
Well, this is a wonderfully comfortable settle. I hope you spend your time sitting in it like we are here.
We don't, strangely enough. I think it's because it's in a position in our drawing room where it's not really too convenient to sit.
I think that's a pity because it is very pleasant, isn't it?
Yes,
very nice sitting here. Why did you buy this piece, or how did you come by it?
Over 25 years ago, the contents of a deanery in the south were being sold, and I purchased it because we rather liked it. My wife is very keen on our nouveau furniture. Although I didn't realise it at the time, it turned out that an uncle of mine used to do his courting on it.
Even better.
A little awkward, I would have thought, but still.
I don't know, I think it's quite an intimate piece. You're well screened from view.
Yes.
I mean, there was a great fashion, as you're well aware, for these high-backed pieces.
Yes.
Traditionally, of course, it was to stop the draft.
Yes.
It then became simply a style that was popular in the 1900s when they looked back to earlier vernacular tradition. But of course, brought into this piece are so many other things which, of course, are quite alien to the past, but fit in with their own time. 1900, 1910, when this was made. The stained glass, the use of mahogany. There's a little embossed brass plaques, that are at the top. The other thing I quite like is the way there's a shelf. And the shelf goes all the way around. Therefore, the piece was to be freestanding.
Exactly,
It stood in the middle of a room, by a fireplace. You could do your courting discreetly if you wanted to, but people could walk all around it. And on that shelf, you put little Art Nouveau vases, that sort of thing around it. And if you look in contemporary magazines, this is exactly the sort of style you get for, as I say, the popularisation, the mass marketing of Art Nouveau. Do you remember what you paid at that deanery auction?
Well, I've been exercising my memory about that, and I think it was round and about £60, I would have thought. Something like that, I think.
That was not a bad price at the time. 25 years ago, Art Nouveau was beginning to become fashionable again. This was always a good piece. £60, curiously, relates to what it might have cost when it was new in 1910.
Really?
They were well-made, factory-made, modern furniture. All this stained glass would have taken time to do. And so, you know, one comes to thinking about what it's worth now. I would put at auction, or if you like, at an insurance valuation, 1,500 to 2,000. It's an unusual piece. It's in good quality, good condition. It's very much of its period. As I say, there's shades of all sorts of famous names, but you can't put a name onto this piece. And that sort of price, I think, is just right.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, on the base here, we have the classic mark that we'd expect of the principal producer of Majolica wares in England in the late 19th century, the mark of the Minton factory. Certainly looking at the piece on the underside, we have absolutely typical English Majolica ware, but when we turn it, we have something totally different. We have the most spectacular view of, I believe, Karnak on the Nile. And we see a complete landscape put onto a three-dimensional surface. It's a particularly difficult thing to do, to plan a landscape which is convincing and to put it onto a three-dimensional surface. But this man, whose signature is coming up here, Edward Risgage, worked at the Minton's factory and was one of the principal exponents of painting onto earthenware. It's rather an interesting combination of ideas. The other interesting combination of ideas is that you have claw and ball feet, you have Chinese borders, and you have what is an overall Persian shape. So it's a typical piece of what we would call Victorian eclecticism. How long have these been in your family?
Oh, I think 30 or 40 years.
And they came, well, they were bought or?
My mother used to be very keen on dispersal sales.
Yes.
And she used to go around picking up things that appealed to her.
Yes.
And that's how she came by these.
You don't have any idea what she paid for them, do you?
No, but I would be surprised if she paid more than £100.
£100, 40 years ago, yeah. This one, of course, is damaged on the rim, and that's a real problem because that instantly affects the value of the object. The other piece, which has an equally stunning landscape, is in good condition. We have a scene of desert warriors converging on another temple, I think from the Karnak complex. And as we come round here, we see a slightly less warlike gathering of people possibly having a picnic in the desert. It's a wonderful piece, and this piece is actually in good order. Made in the 1870s, early 1870s, date-coded underneath. But I would insure them today, bearing in mind there's a very, very strong market in America for, especially for mint and Majolica wares. I would insure them for somewhere in the region of 3,000.
Really? Good gracious. I hadn't any suspicion of that sort of figure.
And the place they would be best put would be into a conservatory with ferns spilling over.
I had it given to me by my mother's friend, 60-odd years ago. Well, we went there to tea, and she always, when we came away, she always gave people a little present, you see, and she gave me this. Although I hasten to say, they had an ironmonger's shop, not a toy shop, and we went right up into her store, and she found me that. And I've always treasured it.
I bet you liked going to tea. You wanted to go to tea every week.
Yes, yes.
She's a lovely lady. Well, it's extraordinary, this hair. Have you ever thought what that hair was?
No, I haven't, no.
Well, it's in fact a wig, but it's been stuck over moulded bisque hair.
Oh, has it?
So it originally had moulded bisque hair, and then the factory put over what we call flock. I mean, it's like flock wallpaper. It's sort of, well, it is a bit of skin with hair on it, but it's worn off a bit. It gives him much more of a realistic look than moulded bisque.
It is. Yeah. Now, is it French or what?
Well, it is French.
Is it?
Yes.
Yes.
And it's known as a character mould of the factory which amalgamated really all the famous French factories in 1899 in Paris. And it became known as SFBJ, which stands for Société de Fabrication de Bébés et Jouets. It has a number at the back of the head, which is quite faint. I don't know whether you can see that.
I've got my spectacles on now, but I can't remember what's on there.
It is a 233 mould.
Yes.
The 233 mould is known as the Screaming Boy.
Oh.
Now, screaming for pleasure or screaming.
Could be either.
I like it. I think it's very interesting. In fact, he's got an open mouth, but we call this an open-closed mouth because it's got assimilated teeth and it doesn't have a hole in it. See? And it's got lovely blue glass eyes.
How old do you think it is, roughly?
And these were registered in 1910.
Oh, were they?
So she obviously had it some time before she gave it to you.
Oh, yes, I expect so. May have been hers.
Yes.
Maybe, I don't know.
And today, you should be insuring it for £2,000.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh, yes.
If you were to put it into an auction, a doll auction, it would go for somewhere between £1,200 and £1,500.
Would it really?
Yes.
You've made my
Lovely
day.
tea time present.
Yes.
Well, the
And
challenge
what is this going
yours.
to turn into,
This will turn into a Glastonbury chair.
you think?
Well,
Hopefully.
yes, I'm
And
sure. You're the expert.
The instructions are where?
In my head.
You've got to help then. Right,
Sounds
let's
like
go.
Yeah.
a challenge, this, right, Nicholas? Here we go, side pieces.
Yeah. Are you going to help us? Or are we?
Probably
The secret really is to start with the
You've got to
back.
start with the seat.
back and the
You've got to-
seat.
The back
yeah.
and the seat,
You've got
right.
to build the back
So
first.
is this is the seat?
Yes.
You've got the back.
That's the back.
Right.
Yeah.
So you build the back
No.
first.
That's for the base.
HCW.
But it's beautiful. Really, it's lovely design there.
There was an artist, William Rowe, specialised in these Persian type subjects, and that was about 1900, 1910. It's not Rowe, but it's very much his sort of thing. It's sort of post De Morgan, but into the Dalton colours.
Yes.
I think it's a great piece. But I'm afraid, as to the artist, I can't remember.
What we get to tell the owner it's worth.
Oh, 400, 500?
Yes. Insure for 6.
Yes,
500,
certainly.
yes. Yeah. Beautiful object.
Beautiful piece.
What's your history of them?
Well, our understanding of them is that they belonged to Bishop Bradfield, who was the bishop who stood on the left-hand side of the Queen at her coronation, and so he's in the 50s.
And as our understanding is, it rather reflects the times of austerity after the war.
Well, that dovetails in with what I'm going to say, because the sapphire is a synthetic sapphire. It's not a real sapphire.
So it really was austerity
It was
time.
austerity, absolutely. It's not a real sapphire.
Right.
It's got bubbles inside it, which means that it's a man-made sapphire.
Right.
And it's mounted in 9-carat gold, so it's the lowest carat.
Well, I think that's rather impressive.
It is rather
fulfilling
impressive.
His austerity.
Absolutely.
Yes. Right.
And similarly, something like this pectoral cross, the sapphire, although it's a natural stone, has no great merit.
Yeah. Well, I'm rather impressed by that, actually.
Yeah, well, I'm glad.
It's funny that, isn't it? I'm rather impressed by
But
that.
it's the first bishop's ring I've ever seen with a synthetic sapphire or synthetic man-made
Well, that was
stone.
definitely post-war austerity. That's very interesting.
That's it.
That's the short ones you want. Unless you're going to turn that one round.
That's it. No.
No, it's these short arms.
Aren't they numbered? Where's another one of those? We got another one of those?
I don't know, I think that's right.
Oh, you're kneeling on it. Ah, look, we can't do it if you hide the bits.
That's got a little crack in it, but we're still going to be reckoning this 30, 40 pounds a piece probably, so you've got 3, 6, and a bit much more for that. So you've got several £100 worth there of nice printed English pottery of about 1825. But this is very exciting. Really very exciting indeed, because this was made in Derby in about between 1755 and 1760. And is extremely rare. Early Derby blue and white with this sticky blue is extremely rare. It's interesting, they've had problems with firing it, and the base must have come out bumpy, and they ground it flat, yeah, which has taken away the key sign of what is Derby. These things here, which is where the pad marks or patch marks, where it sat in the kiln. But to find a 1760 basket of this quality in such lovely condition, there's nothing happened to this. You know, you failed to chip it anywhere. It's absolutely perfect, and so I think it's worth not less than £1,500, maybe 2,000.
Very nice. I can't believe it.
We're getting there. Finger on the stopwatch.
Excellently.
Well, what would you have done without you? Where's the top?
Very good.
Where's the top?
Is this the bit you're looking for?
Oh, you were And
Hey, voila.
There you
there we
are.
are. Voila.
One
Who's
chair.
going to sit in it? How long did that time? I'm not risking it.
Oh, well.
I think you should.
See if it's...
Right.
Yeah,
Does it work as well as it used to?
Yes, it's just the same.
Well, I must have been given it as a child in between 1933 and 1935, something like that. And being away at school, I think it probably wasn't played with in that sense at all until perhaps 1939. In between 1940 and 44, it was in 3 houses that were...
In safekeeping?
In safekeeping, but
Yes.
they were all severely damaged by bombing.
So hardly safekeeping.
So in
Dear,
some
dear.
way it survived, and very little else did.
Extraordinary.
And then I think that my mother then kept it for me until 1960, when she died, came to my possession. Quite frankly, it's been packed up since then.
Made by the company Britons.
Yes.
And Britons, of course, came to popularity when they invented the hollow cast soldier back in 1893. And what I love about it is the fact that you could buy pieces to add to it and add to it and add to it. So one Christmas you might have got the lupins, and the next Christmas you might have got the cypresses, and then the nipophia, and then the little chrysanthemums, and so on. It was an endless supply of Christmas presents, a bit like a system railway, where, you know, one year you'd get the train, and the next year you'd get the station, and so on. But also, look at this. I mean, look at the greenhouse with all its little pots here, pots of lobelia, the actual trays on which the potting would have been done. Of course, it has suffered a little bit in play.
Yes.
If not in the bombing.
Yes. Well, we'll put it down to play.
Put it down to play. But generally, I think the condition is very good. The value of a group like this, which is very comprehensive and looks very attractive laid out, the value would be something around 150 to 200 pounds with ease.
Interesting.
And now, if it was mine, I'd be wanting to add to it. So you still have the pond to get. There are other accessories you can get.
I find them very rare as I go round. They're not very many.
Well, I'd like to feel that your small garden here could be built into perhaps a slightly larger version over the years.
Yes.
And then it would give you, well, I'm sure future generations, considerable pleasure. Anyway, I'm very pleased to have seen it today.
That will give me a renewed interest to go out and look for additional pieces
Good,
now. Yes,
good.
thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing it.
Thank you.
No violin. What happened?
Oh, well, there never was one.
You didn't have the violin?
We didn't have, no, we just had the case, yes.
Just the case. When did the case come to you?
About 20 years ago when my father died, and he was given it. He used to make violins and violas himself.
Oh, right. But it is rather a special violin case. It's painted, and it says Torbjörn Harvesen, Lione or Ljöve, 1801. And the case on top is carved with this heart-shaped shield and a lion wielding an axe. Now, a heart-shaped shield is typically Scandinavian. The inscription on the side is Norwegian. And the family that's being referred to here with the rampant lion could possibly be a Danish-Norwegian family called Løvenskiold. Løvenskiold means lion shield. It could be. But it was a very, very popular motif, so I'm not sure about that, absolutely. But the case is a very, very high-quality case, and it would have contained a very, very high-quality violin. Not a Stradivarius violin, but do you know?
Is it called a Hardanger fiddle?
That's right, the Hardanger fiddle, which is the sort of Norwegian answer to Stradivarius, if you like. It's a folk instrument, largely like a violin, certainly of the violin family, but it has sympathetic strings. That is to say, a set of strings that run parallel underneath the main course of the strings, and which vibrate and give off harmonics. It's a very, very popular instrument in Norway. Hardanger fiddles are extremely sought after and highly prized within the Norwegian community, and that is why someone has taken a great deal of trouble to actually produce this lovely little box. On the other side, we've actually got the painter saying, painted the 22nd of March, and I'm afraid I can't work out what that says. My Norwegian doesn't stretch quite that far. But this was not just to be pretty. This wasn't something that would sit in the corner. This was actually intended to be taken about, and these strong steel or iron hinges showed that the thing would have been strapped on over your shoulder, and you would have walked down to the town to play at the Norwegian equivalent of a ceilidh. It's an absolutely wonderful piece of Norwegian folk art. In Norway, where it is worth most of anywhere, this would certainly appeal to a violin collector. And I think that they would have to pay at least £3,000 or £4,000 for it.
Interesting.
Find a fiddle.
Oh, yes.
Have you any history to it at all? Well, really, basically, my husband bought it about 20 years ago. We don't know very much about it, apart from the fact we did know it was made by the Napoleonic prisoners of war. And that's about all, really.
Yeah.
It's always been very cherished and has been kept in a cabinet. Well, the story of this sort of work is that Napoleonic prisoners, from bones, meat bones of the food that they got, they made these things. They do say that some of the senior wardens would put a man into a better cell with a better bed and better food if he was talented in making these things. And I believe that too. It's a natural thing to happen, because he would then in turn sell it and do very well for himself. And the other return was a little bit of baccy for the man that made it. Quite an enchanting little piece, and I should imagine, can you imagine making something like this? I mean, where do you start?
Exactly. I don't think anyone could make that nowadays. I mean,
No.
it's amazing.
But still, they had all the time in the world, didn't they?
It makes it incredible.
I mean, with 22 years of war, you'd have a lot of time if you were captured early in the days and you spent all your time in these prisons. But this is a delightful little thing, and I think your value would be something like £400 to £500.
Right.
So it's rather a big leap, really, from the ruins of the Great Hall here, these beautiful windows, 13th century windows, Gothic windows, to this very, very nice 17th century arch, more of a Mannerist type early Baroque arch with the keystone there. Very, very nice shape indeed.
Yeah.
But there's something wrong here. Do you like him?
Not particularly, no. But there are two others.
They've been added later.
Ah.
That's a sort of Victorianism.
Ah, I see.
So I'm suspicious about that, and I don't like the contrast in colour. And also, if you just look here, this drawer, a pine-lined drawer on a piece of furniture that's trying to be early 17th century. And it would never be pine, it would always be oak. The dovetails are possibly 100 years old. You just see them quite nicely made, handmade.
Yes.
But not original. The reason being, I don't think it would have had a drawer at all. It would have just been a side table. No drawer, and very, very commonly, these 17th century tables had the drawer put in later.
Right.
It's called a credence table. And
I
really,
didn't know that.
really meant as a credence to go against the side of the wall. Like a credence was a shelf originally, and that's
Yes.
an extension of the wall made into it with a support made as a table. Made of oak, as we see, but it takes, they're not easy, these things. We're going to have a good look at it. Well, the leg is very nice here. This bobbin turner, you can see here details of the little bits of incised lines have been done intentionally in the turnings, a little bit of decoration. This lovely sharp collar dividing them all here. Nice colour, bits of green paint, I like that, bits of views. But then you go down to this leg and the one near you, you can see quite clearly there's been a piece let in. And I imagine the whole of this piece has been put in, it probably rotted away on a wet, damp floor. Straw-covered floor, just rotted away down to the stretch, and somebody's replaced it, but replaced it probably 100 years ago. Now, the other thing that surprised me about this, these credence tables normally are a side table without a flap.
Yes.
But if they do have a flap, like this one, I'd expect the flap, instead of coming up from the back as a conventional table, I can't get at it, there we go, instead of going from the back, would normally come from the front backwards. And this simply won't do that.
Ah, I see.
There's been a lot of fiddling around with this top. I mean...
Yes.
Don't ask me the question of what's old and what isn't on this top. But this is pretty genuine, so I would date it to the sort of 1620, 1630 period.
Ah.
Have you had it that long?
Not quite. No. We've had it about 32 years,
Right.
almost exactly to the month, actually.
Right, as a sort of family piece handed down?
No, not really. It was in payment of a debt.
Oh, lovely, right.
So that's how we came by it, which at the time I didn't think really covered the debt, but the chap was going into hospital, so I thought, well, that's all right.
Right.
You know, forget it.
So as a payment of a debt, what was the debt worth at the time, do you know?
Yes, £87.50.
£87.50, right. Well, it certainly increased over those years quite nicely. I mean, you've got a very good 17th century table.
Yes.
And it's going to make at auction certainly £1,400–1,500 at auction.
Really, as much as that?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I shall take it home and I'm sure my wife will put some extra polish on it.
Now, in this series, as you know, I've been talking to our experts about some of their own favourite things. And it absolutely comes as no surprise to discover that in the case of Bunny Campione, her favourite things are bunny rabbits, which in turn led to you being called Bunny. Bunny. Yes?
Not exactly. Not precisely exactly. In fact, when I was nearly 3, I was given a little coat made of bunny fur with a hood and 2 rabbit ears. And I immediately became Bunny. I wouldn't answer to anything else, except my father called me Bundle for the rest of his life. And then I was given this rabbit to go with the coat.
Yes.
And she used to come to bed with me for most of my
So she's well
youth.
loved. Now, and this is part of the collection of 50, I gather.
At least
50 of them.
yes.
Who's this?
Well, now this one is my favourite because he squeaks.
Yep.
And he's one of the earliest Peter Rabbits that were made by Steiff in about 1903. And Beatrix Potter, who wrote Peter Rabbit in 1902, couldn't find any factory to make Peter Rabbit, and so she applied to Steiff in Germany.
Who had already been famous for bears.
for elephants, for all sorts of animals, but and rabbits, but not looking like Peter Rabbit.
So the whole tradition of rabbits appearing in this form really springs from Beatrix Potter?
Yes. Certainly standing up, anyway, standing up rabbits.
And who are these two?
Now, these two, I bought them separately. They cost me rather a lot of money, I have to say, because they are rare to be in their original clothes and in such good condition. And they also have a mark on the bottom of one of them has a mark on the slipper, which is the earliest Steiff mark, which was an elephant. So I'm quite proud of those.
And finally, what's this one?
Well, this isn't a Steiff. He is an automaton rabbit by Rouet de Caen in Paris circa 1910. He's probably worth around £1,000, and he knits away, or she knits away. Doesn't have to be female, does it?
No, it doesn't, not at all. So just some of your collection of 50 bunnies?
Yes.
They are actually a pair, are they?
They are indeed,
yes. Well,
they were bought as a pair.
They certainly were, yes. The town clerk's accounts of 1660 show the purchase of a pair of maces for £38 and 10 shillings in 1660 at the Restoration.
Right, at the Restoration. Certainly look to have Restoration type of decoration on them. You've got this typical influence that came over from the Dutch court of this embossed floral work, but obviously with the emblems of England and Scotland, the rose and the thistle. And then you've got CR, you've got the fleur-de-lis, the rose, the harp, and the thistle again, all the emblems of the kingdom. And then the full royal armorial on top.
Of course, originally they were weapons, and that was their function. Their purpose was to protect the mayor, so that if anybody leapt out in front of the mayor, the sergeants at mace who would be carrying them would leap forward and make sure the mayor was protected.
Hence the one or two knocks on them, yeah?
Well, could be.
Could be.
Yes.
Careless talk costs lives. It must be the most famous phrase out of the Second World War.
Yes, I think
and,
so.
of course, the image that everybody knows is this wonderful one by Fougas of Hitler and Goering on the bus behind these two gossips, chatting away about what they're doing in the factories.
Yes.
It's a great series. I mean, some of them I know, some of them are not so familiar. How have you got this set?
Well, they were my father's. He worked in the Admiralty, of course, as a naval officer most of
Yes.
the war. And he collected them as they became, and new ones went up. He took the old ones home.
Took them from the notice boards,
Yes.
effectively. Because, I mean, these are small for office use. I
That's
mean,
right,
they
yes.
existed on a grand size for trains and
Oh,
undergrounds,
yes,
and
yes.
they came in many, many
One
forms.
saw them in the undergrounds every time. We always looked to see if there was a new one when we were small.
What is great is that he bothered to take these home at a time when most people would simply have thrown them away.
Well, he had his own little ideas on the subject because...
Did he?
Well,
what's this one?
this one is
Oh,
his own
look.
addition to the
This
series.
is a new, unknown, unrecorded Fougas.
Well, hardly Fougas.
After Fougas.
After Fougas.
Courtesy Fougas.
Yes, courtesy
I think that's
Fougas.
great.
Splendid.
I'm
I
sure if
think he
Fougas had
that-
thought of it, he would have done it.
I think he didn't dare, actually. It
Yes.
wasn't the time when such things were so accepted.
So this is the Admiralty Special.
This is the Admiralty Special for the, well, I presume they refer to it as the heads.
Yes, exactly. Did he put it up? Or
Oh, yes, certainly.
I'm sure it was very well received.
Oh, yes.
Really quite desirable in collector terms now, I'm afraid. Because it is so famous.
Yes, I
it is the one
suppose they
image that
are,
every
yes.
poster collector wants.
I was expecting if they were originals, one would have had value, but not
No,
these.
they are originals in the sense that there isn't an original. I mean, there might be a drawing somewhere, but
Oh, I see.
the original is the poster produced at the time. And I think you could think about at least £100 each.
Oh, right.
And probably
thank you.
very, very much more for this unique achievement.
Hardly.
This little watercolour is absolutely beautiful. I'd always heard that Wells was one of the most beautiful cathedral cities in England, and I found it is, but now I see that it was very, very similar, about 1800, I suppose. Tell me about this watercolour.
Well, I don't know anything about it, except that when I was sorting out a pile of papers and old archive material in the cupboard when I first came to work here, I found this unframed, and I've...
This is here in the Bishop's Palace?
Yes, in the Bishop's Palace, in the part that's open to the public.
Right.
And I've kept an eye on it, and I've used it for visual aids when I've been giving talks. And then somebody spied it and said, that's very valuable, you should look after that. So
Well,
I have done.
Well done you, because it really is lovely. But you did something else terribly clever, in my judgment, because you've also brought this in, this print, which I think belongs to you personally,
Yes,
does it?
that was a very early present from my husband in the 1960s.
Well, it's an absolutely delightful topographical record of what Wells was like at circa 1800, and obviously derives from this watercolour. But putting two and two together, when we read at the bottom of your print, sketched by the late W. Alexander, Esquire, it gives us a very, very leading clue as to who actually painted this watercolour. And it must have been the work of William Alexander, who was one of the best of the English watercolourists working in the golden age of English watercolour painting, either side of 1800. And it absolutely is his style. Isn't it delightful there? And so little changed. Well, very, very clever of you to find it. Is it insured?
No, but I'll have to pass all this on to the palace trustees.
Right, well, I think they should be told.
Yes.
They should be told that this little watercolour that you've been using as a visual aid is, well, probably at auction would fetch a good £2,000 and should possibly be insured for something like £2,500 or £3,000.
Well, that's tremendously useful information, and thank you for putting it all together.
No, well, thank you for bringing it. It's absolutely lovely and a wonderful memorial of Wells.
I feel like the girl on the front here. I'm so excited. It feels like Christmas.
It says exciting to the young and old on the box.
Well, it's very exciting to the young. I don't know about to the old. I've always wanted to see one of these work, and I wanted to see one in its original box. And here it is. Now, it's made by a Japanese company, Modern Toys. There's the trademark down here in the corner. But the best bit is inside, I hope.
Yes.
Now, tell me, whilst I'm unpacking it, tell me about where it came from.
Well, it came from Japan, Yokohama, in 1957.
And you bought it yourself?
I bought it myself, yes.
Now that, I think, goes into the top there, does it not?
It does.
This, battery's in? Battery's in.
Yes.
Right.
Switch on.
Switch on. Oh, I haven't switched on. That's a very good point. Yep, there you go. Now, here's the control button. There we go. Let's see what happens. What happens if I press it again?
It'll turn left. And the lights.
Just what I've always wanted. Isn't that wonderful? And it's in perfect condition. What a toy!
Now press.
There we go.
That's it.
Fantastic. Well, let me pick it up and we'll have a quick look at it. Oh, if I can give you...
Surely.
And look at the condition of that. It's based obviously on one of the great American gas guzzlers of the period. And there is a terrific amount of interest in this sort of toy. First of all, battery operated. Secondly, Japanese. Thirdly, this wonderful design, dripping with chrome, shaded windows and so on. And I would have said the value today is going to be something between £250 and £300. It's a terrific toy.
Yes.
Well, it's given me a lot of pleasure.
It has me
And everybody
too.
else a lot of pleasure.
Now tell me a little bit about this. How on earth did you get hold of this?
Well, my mother died and I was just given it, that's all.
So no more history beyond that at all?
No, I always just thought it was a pretty scent bottle and that was it.
So you don't know the age of it?
No,
nothing at all?
nothing at
All
all.
right.
Just a complete Nothing. surprise it was, wasn't it?
But you do appreciate it's a beautiful piece.
Oh, it's very pretty, yes.
And more importantly, the condition is exquisite.
Oh.
As you can see, the colouring is in absolutely perfect condition because it's been lodged in this box for, I would say, around about 175 years.
Do you really?
And if we unscrew the lid, revealed is a little gold stopper. And you can remove the stopper, there we are, revealing a hole that you would put scent in. Now, that is lovely, but then when you look at the base, you can see that if you flip this cap at the end, it reveals a compartment. Now, occasionally you would have a little grill on the top of that compartment, but in this case there is no grill, so that suggests to me that because it's tight shut, it was probably used to perhaps contain scent or a small lock of hair.
Oh.
Well, now a piece of this design, this classical vase shape in yellow metal, is gold. It is gold, fine gold, and the enamelling in this is absolutely perfect. Polychrome in purple and green and white, all these little spots, tangerine, and then in the center you've got these little plaques depicting little cupids with, in this case, a flaming torch, and on this shield is 2 flaming hearts. And then we turn it over and you've got another 2 here with little posies of roses. Absolutely charming, but I don't mind telling you, to find something in this condition after all this time is extraordinarily rare. So the box itself is interesting because you can see in the lid it's manufactured by a firm called Rundle Bridge. Now, Rundle Bridge were jewellers to the court, working particularly in the 19th century, first 50 years, and they made the very best jewellery that came out of the UK at that particular time. Yeah. So the fact that you've got this piece in that fitted case represents the high superior quality of the piece. Now, there we are. You've got no information beyond the fact that it passed through your mother to you. No one's ever looked at it before. No one's seen it before. Right. Well, let's...
We didn't even know the bottom opened like you did. I don't know how you did.
With that little compartment there.
Yeah.
There we are. Well, these things are incredibly rare. And the fact that it is in the condition that it is in that fitted box, will add a tremendous premium to it. So would it be a surprise to hear that it's worth at least £1,000?
Certainly.
Well, it's probably worth about £3,000.
Is it really?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Wonderful.
Well, that brings us to the end of this programme, and indeed the end of our travels around Britain in the current series of the Antiques Roadshow. Our warm thanks to the many thousands of people who've turned up wherever we've been and have helped to make this series so successful and indeed so enjoyable too. We've had many surprises in the last few weeks, but perhaps for us, none greater than this. It's a British Academy Award known as a BAFTA, and it was presented recently to the Antiques Roadshow. The inscription on it reads, the Lou Grade Award for a significant and popular programme. Well, we thought, really, in honour of this BAFTA, you might like to see some vintage roadshows once again. And in the coming weeks, we're going to show you 4 of them, beginning next Sunday on BBC One with a programme we recorded in Barnstaple in 1986. That's some vintage roadshows on BBC One in the next few weeks. In the meantime, our thanks to the Bishop of Bath and Wells for being our host today, and until next week, goodbye.